Halo Studios fixing the library is not really about making an old level look better. It's about whether a remake should only correct what players hated, and also strengthen what made the original game matter. And that distinction is crucial, because from what we have seen, Halo Studios has improved almost everything surrounding the Flood. The environments are more distinct, the navigation is clearer, the encounters have more variety, the atmosphere finally makes the library feel like a massive containment facility to be consumed from the inside. Now that's a real improvement. It has atmosphere, but it also tests your patience. The remake appears to fix much of that. There's a strange trade-off here. Halo Studios improved the level they introduced to Flood, while apparently leaving some of the Flood's most effective systemic behavior behind. Infection forms can swarm more intelligently. They can prioritize Fallen Flood and bring combat forms back into the fight. But they apparently cannot infect ordinary Marines, or elites during active combat. And the sudden sprinting pressure associated with later Flood appearances, especially like Halo 2, also appears to be missing. So the Flood may be more polished, they may be more varied, may even be more intelligent in specific situations, but they do not always feel like a biological threat spreading across the battlefield. And that matters because the Flood are not supposed to feel like another enemy faction. They're supposed to feel like a disaster. The signal here is really the infection form. On the surface, it is one of the most basic enemies in Halo. Small body, weak attack, easy to kill. Most players see a group of them and start firing without giving the mechanic much attention. But the infection form is doing something else entirely. It represents the Flood's whole identity. Covenant attack you. The Flood convert what is already there. They do not simply enter a battlefield with a fixed number of soldiers. The threat comes from their ability to turn bodies, weapons, knowledge, and casualties into just more Flood. Now that's the nightmare here. You're not fighting an army that brought reinforcements. You're fighting an organism that manufactures reinforcements from the people losing the battle. And the remake does preserve part of this idea. Infection forms can apparently prioritize Fallen Flood combat forms and revive them. Now that's a strong mechanic. It gives a small infection form a real battlefield function. They are not just disposable balloons rushing towards your shields. If you ignore them, enemies you already killed can get back up. That creates pressure. You drop a combat form. You turn toward the next threat. Then an infection form breaches the body behind you. Now the enemy you already spent ammunition killing is back in the fight. That is effective design because it changes how you read the room. The weakest enemy can become the most urgent threat. But here's the detail that exposes the limitation. The infection forms appear unable to transform ordinary Marines and elites into new Flood forms during active gameplay. That does not mean Halo Studios removed a functioning system from the original Combat Evolved. Live battlefield transformation was not a standard feature of that game. That distinction needs to stay clear. That is not about accusing the remake of deleting something the original already had. It is about the opportunity Halo Studios had. That is the full remake. It is rebuilding the missions. It is about pulling in Flood types and ideas from later games. It is changing encounter spaces to support 4-player co-op. It does not change every technical limitation from 2001. So once you start modernizing the Flood, the question changes. You're no longer asking whether the remake copied the original accurately. You're asking whether it created the strongest version of the Flood that Halo systems now allow. And if infection forms can revive a fallen Flood body, but cannot take control of the ordinary Marine, lying beside it, the system feels selective. The Flood can recycle themselves, but they cannot always spread. That is a strange line to draw from an enemy built around infection. Here's the deep layer to all this. The deeper issue is the difference between improving enemy variety and improving enemy identity. Those are not the same thing. A developer can add more enemy types, stronger attacks, improve animations, better sound design, and smarter pathfinding. All of that can make combat more polished, but polished does not automatically preserve the core idea behind the enemy. The Flood's identity does not come from one weapon. It does not come from one silhouette. It does not even come from the number of enemies rushing you. It comes from escalation. The Flood should make a battle worse the longer it continues. Bodies become resources. Dead enemies stand back up. Friendly soldiers become hostile. A safe room becomes contaminated. A controlled fight becomes an outbreak. That cause and effect chain is what separates the Flood from a basic zombie faction. That is where live infection matters. Picture a simple encounter. You enter a room with 3 Marines. Flood combat forms attack from one side. Infection forms pour in from another. 1 Marine goes down. In a normal shooter, that Marine is simply gone. Your team lost 1 unit. But in a fully systemic Flood encounter, that death creates a new problem. The infection forms reach the body. The Marine begins to change. Now your team did not simply lose 1 soldier. The enemy gained 1. That is a 2-point swing. You become weaker, the Flood becomes stronger. And the battlefield tells the story without stopping for a cutscene. Then there is the missing sprint behavior. Flood sprinting served a crucial function. It broke distance. A combat form could appear manageable from across the room, then suddenly close the gap. That movement forced you to react. You cannot casually backpedal while firing forever. The Flood had momentum. It felt reckless because self-preservation did not matter to them. They were willing to throw a broken body directly at you because the individual body was disposable. If that pressure is missing, while the player now has modern movement options, the balance shifts. Master Chief becomes faster. The battlefield becomes larger. Navigation becomes clearer. But the ordinary Flood may become easier to manage at range. That can make the encounters smoother without making it more frightening. Otherwise, you have cleaned up the experience while replacing the tension that cleanup removed. Now, there is a cost to this, and the cost lands on the player experience and on the identity of the series. Players do not need every remake to punish them for nostalgia. Nobody needs a library to remain a 2-hour hallway maze just because that's how I felt in 2001. That would be dumb. Fix the repetition. Fix the visual sameness. Fix the moments where Guilty Spark leaves you standing around while another wave enters the room. But do not confuse frustration with fear. They are not the same thing. The original library often frustrated players because of how it was structured. The Flood frightened players because they felt relentless, unnatural, and difficult to contain. A strong remake should remove the first problem without weakening the second feeling. That's the balancing act. Most players will not describe the issue in technical language. They will not say, the enemy ecosystem lacks sufficient host conversion system. They'll say, the Flood do not feel as dangerous. They look great, but something feels off. The level is better, but the encounters feel easier to control. That reaction matters. Players often feel the result of a system before they can name the missing mechanic. Here's the standard I think that we should look at this from. Do not judge this remake by whether the library is less annoying. That's the weak standard. Judge by whether the library now delivers the strongest possible Flood experience. Halo Studios did not need to preserve every repetitive hallway to remain faithful to the original. It needed to preserve the purpose of the level. The library is supposed to be the mission where the Flood stop feeling like a surprise enemy and start feeling like an unstoppable infestation. You've already met them by this point. The mystery is gone. Now the game needs to show you the scale. It needs to show you persistence. It needs to show you why the Forerunners built an entire containment system around this parasite. The improved environments help. The larger spaces help. The biomass, fog, lighting, and environmental contamination help. Those elements tell you that something terrible has happened here, but the gameplay should tell you that something terrible is still happening. That's the stronger standard. The Flood should not merely occupy the environment, they should alter the battle. They should create losses into pressure. No, they should convert losses into pressure. They should force you to kill infection forms before they reach a body. They should make friendly NPCs into a potential liability. They should turn the floor behind you into a second front line. That is the difference between an atmosphere and systemic horror. Atmosphere tells you the room is infected. Systems make you fight to stop the infection from spreading. And to be fair, the remake is not doing nothing. Reviving fallen combat forms is meaningful. Smarter swarming is meaningful. Additional Flood forms create more encounter variety. Halo Studios deserves credit for improving a mission many players have criticized for more than 2 decades. But this is exactly why the missing systems stand out. The remake has done the hard work of rebuilding the library. It has already opened the machine. It has already moved the parts. This was a chance to connect the best flood mechanics from across the franchise and create the version that older hardware could not fully support. Do not stop at better enemies. Build the ecosystem. So the real issue is not that Halo Studios changed the library. The library needed to change. The issue is that Halo Studios may have modernized the level more completely than it modernized the threat inside of it. The environments are stronger, pacing is stronger, navigation is stronger, atmosphere is stronger, but the Flood's greatest strength was never just how many forms they had, it was what they could do to everything around them. The remake expands the Flood as a collection of enemies, but it appears to stop short of fully presenting them as a spreading biological system. And that is the signal people need to see. Halo Studios may have fixed almost everything players hated about the library. Now it needs to make sure it does not fix away the thing that gave the mission its identity.
That's the case file for today. The full report is waiting in the newsletter. But before you go, I've pulled up 2 more files for you on screen. Pick one, and I'll see you in the next investigation.